A disturbing paranormal account has persisted from a rural community in southern Australia, the events which took place thought to date back to around the 1970s. It was a hot, sultry Saturday afternoon in the not too distant past that an engaged couple had fixed the date for their wedding ceremony. Here, in the dusty Wimmera region of northwestern Victoria, near a stretch known as the Little Desert, stood an old weather-beaten wooden church outside a small town. Most of the area's inhabitants had gathered there to witness the marriage of two well-known young locals. The bride was the daughter of a prominent businessman and the groom a wheat farmer with a modest property about 20 kilometres out of the township. The simple little church had been dressed up with bunches of wildflowers and swathes of pungent eucalyptus leaves. The minister stood waiting in his traditional robes, and the elderly organist had taken her seat at the harmonium in readiness to strike up the bridal march. An excited congregation of attendees completely filled out the hard wooden pews, chatting amongst themselves while awaiting the arrival of the wedding party. In true outback style, the bride drove herself to the church in her own small Morris car, with her father sitting beside her and her mother and sister, who was the only bridesmaid, in the back seat. The bridal party arrived punctually at the small wicket gate to the church, however were bemused to find a worried-looking best man who informed them that the groom had not yet shown up. He had arranged to meet the best man half an hour ago, but being a no-show, it was assumed that he had had car trouble. Another half an hour passed, with still no appearance of the bridegroom, and, in those days, no mobile phones to enable anyone to call and check. The congregation started to become restless, and the bride became increasingly worried, while her mother became teary and her father angry. All were relieved when, half an hour after the service was to have started, the bridegroom appeared. He was not driving his car as expected, but on foot and running up the road in the direction of the church. As he got closer, the assembled group saw that his suit was ripped and covered in red soil, with, concerningly, a makeshift bandage tied around his head which was clotted with dried blood. The bride, while relieved that her beau had turned up, but still worried about the state he was in, asked him what had happened to him. He told her that he had had a bit of an accident on the road. A huge kangaroo had bounded across in front of him, and he had been unable to miss it and lost control of the car. The poor animal had met its demise, but he, the groom, was okay. He had had to wait for another passing car to come along so that he could hitch a ride, he explained. He complimented his future wife on her gorgeous appearance and suggested that they get on with the wedding. The minister, however, was troubled by the injury to the young man's head and keen for the local doctor to examine and treat him prior to the ceremony. This suggestion the bridegroom brushed aside, as he felt bad about delaying proceedings for too long already. He said he was happy to attend the doctor after the nuptials were completed. The ceremony then took place, with the bride and groom exchanging their vows and the groom placing a gold ring on his beloved's finger. As the church congregation became restless in anticipation of the ensuing luncheon and beverages, the minister finally pronounced the pair man and wife. Most of the attendees then trekked off to enjoy the spread of sandwiches, fruitcake and cold beer which had been arranged at the nearby pub. However, as the newlyweds prepared to leave the church, the groom asked his now spouse if she would drive him out to pick up his damaged car before they joined the wedding breakfast. He was worried that a passer-by might steal the tools he kept in the back and said that he would be able to enjoy himself more fully if he knew that his vehicle was safe. The bride was keen to do anything to help her new husband and readily agreed, so the pair promised their guests that they would return to the party within the hour. Accompanying them in separate cars were the best man, the bridesmaid, and 3 of the groom's closest friends, who opted to travel out in case help was required in towing the car back into town. Hitching up her bridal gown and tossing her veil into the rear seat, the bride climbed into the driver's seat of her own small car as the groom slid in beside her. He was obviously in pain, wincing as he ducked his head down and then settled himself in the passenger seat. His wife asked again if he was feeling all right and reminded him of his doctor's appointment on their return. "I don't want you passing out on me tonight," she joked. The couple laughing as she drove off, followed by the two cars carrying her sister and her husband's friends. Years later, one of these friends testified to the bizarre and horrifying events that followed, witnessed by all those who accompanied the couple on that day. The man described that all the roads were unsealed then, and that the swirling dust made progress difficult and impaired their vision. He was riding in the second car with the best man and the bride's sister sitting in the back. The other car followed them with the two other men inside. The bride and groom were a few minutes ahead of them, and they simply could not see her little Morris, although they knew where she was heading. Following behind, the only thing they could see was the cloud of dust in their wake. The witness reported that they drove on for miles until all of a sudden very strange things started happening. He explained that in the Wimmera region, bends are very rare and it's not unusual to drive a straight 100 miles without even turning the steering wheel. However, they did come to what must have been the only bend in that particular road, a right-angled turn where the boundaries of adjacent properties met. The terrain all around them was covered with thick stunted bush scrub, and they were unable to see what was around the bend as they approached it. The best man had just been saying to him that perhaps this was where the accident had taken place, when he stopped himself in mid-sentence and cried out in shock. As they drove around the bend, they could see the small Morris stalled in the centre of the road, causing the best man to ram his foot on the brakes so that they stopped just in time, barely a yard from the other car. However, the truly shocking sight was the figure of the bride, now standing beside her car, wringing her hands and screaming frantically. They piled out of their cars, and the bride's sister grabbed her arms and held her, begging her to explain what was wrong. Meanwhile, the witness and best man had peered into her small car and had an inkling of what was wrong. It was empty. The bride sobbed, "He's gone." She explained that her husband had been sitting next to her 1 minute and that they were talking, with him saying that they were nearly there. Then suddenly he just vanished. The men wondered if he could have just wandered off, but she answered that this would have been impossible as they were travelling at 20 miles an hour at the time. The other car then arrived at the scene, and the two friends of the groom and the best man decided to search the scrubland on both sides of the road. The witness said that he didn't bother. He believed the bride and knew that no one makes up stories like that. The three men returned after about 10 minutes, having found nothing, and he suggested that they needed to go to the crash site. While the distressed bride and bridesmaid waited in his car, the four men drove on to find the scene of the accident. One reassured the bride that they would probably find her husband at that location and would bring him back. However, the terrible truth had already dawned on our witness. Half a mile further down the road, they spotted the groom's car, opposite the dead kangaroo he had hit on the other side. The car was overturned and lying with its wheels stuck up vertically, its roof crushed and almost flattened. Inside was the bridegroom, where he had obviously been trapped, his lifeless form wedged between the dashboard and roof, his head seemingly having gone through the windscreen. The historian Richard Davis, who documented this account, relates that the local police, coroner and even the press were tactfully vague about the unfortunate bridegroom's time of death. However, all those present at the wedding knew what they had seen, while the man's bold signature was plain to see in the church registry, and his now widow wore the gold ring he had given her. Sadly, she attended her husband's funeral a week after their marriage, and then apparently moved out of the area. It's not known if she ever saw his spirit, so determined to turn up on the day and take his vows again.